Hi, I'm Morgan Baden, author of Daphne and Velma, The Dark Deception, and you're listening to a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
The gang's all here, they're on the case, and there's no ghost that they wouldn't face, 'cause they dig it, Scooby-Doo. Yeah, they dig it, Scooby-Doo.
Hey gang, and welcome to another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo, the show that attempts to unravel 50 years of mysteries, meddling kids, and masked villains. My name is Mike Josick, and I'll be your guide through all things ghostly and groovy as I investigate every angle of every mystery and beyond. So grab yourself some Scooby snacks, fire up the mystery machine, and let's start the show.
Our trap is ready and...
Hey, who's this loser?
Henry Bascom.
Well, Mr. Henry Bascom, whoever you are, it's off to Iron Heights Penitentiary. Ooh.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 40 of the podcast. A nice round number that is, 40. And on this installment of the show, I'm going to be featuring part 2 of my conversation with composers, writers, songwriters, singers, multi-instrumentalists, David Poe and Vivek Maddala. If you haven't checked out part 1, I would recommend doing so. Just go to ScoobyDooCast.com or wherever it is you nabbed this episode. I'm sure episode 39 is not far behind. And for anybody who's already listened to part 1, apologies for the slight delay last week. I had my conversation with writer, producer, director Maxwell Adams, who did the Happy Halloween Scooby-Doo DVD, which was released on the 6th of October, and I wanted that interview to drop to coincide with the release of that DVD. So part 2 of this conversation kind of got pushed to this week. And if you happen to be listening to this episode in the far-flung future, none of this really matters, and I sincerely hope that the way things are going, we're not all living in personal, individualized bubbles. It's a genuine fear. Do not tell me I'm wrong for feeling it. Anyways, I don't really have anything else to add going into this second half of the conversation, so as per usual, I will meet you guys on the other side, and I hope you enjoy part 2 of my interview with David Poe and Vivek Maddala. So, Chris, just getting briefly back to the adaptation credit. The adaptation credit is for the lyrics, and you did the music?
Yeah. So, actually, this is a funny story as well. I totally forgot about it until you just mentioned this. So, when David came in to do the vocal, I don't think we had the new lyrics yet. So we used. Am I wrong? Did we? Or no, we had a variation, but then the suits at one. Okay, so let me rewind. Okay, to answer your question. So yeah, I think what happened was I created this music track, did a temp vocal, then Chris sent me the new lyrics. Because I basically just used the original lyrics from the 1969 show, just as a placeholder. So he sent me the new lyrics, which David then came over and sang. And then I guess the legal department combined with other executives at Warner's started getting a little nitpicky and wanted to change a couple of lyrics. And then David, you came back. Is that right? And we punched.
I remember this now. Yeah.
We punched in that one word or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah. As I recall, and I say this with all due respect, but as a lyricist, I did not think that either version of the lyric exactly rolled off the tongue. But having said that, I was so married to the original version, and I remember joking about it.
Right. To catch and unmask that villain, right?
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we were we were kind of joking about it and coming up with other goofy variations, but yeah.
Yeah. And words that were equally like difficult and unmusical and difficult to sing. Yeah, I remember that. That's funny. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, we did do a punch in on that.
So I think what happened was then we might have even offered a counter, like another option for them to consider. We did a couple of versions even, right? And we ended up with something in the middle. But the lyrics that we ended up with, I think, was some sort of hybrid of what Chris originally sent me and maybe a little bit of our feedback and then and then, you know, what the legal department wanted, and it was somewhere in between. But it's true that, like, the lyric might look good on paper, and maybe if you read it, but when you sing it, the phonemes end up in weird places, or you have to contort your mouth in a weird way to sing it. So
A lot of consonants.
that's what it was. Yeah.
Do you remember what the original lyric was that got changed?
I'm sure I have. I could dig it up. It's probably in my email, because they were just emailing me lyrics. So David, do you remember?
It was something like to catch, you know, to expose and detain that villain, something like that.
Like that, right?
You know, it was just it didn't roll off the tongue, but nor did the newer one, in my estimation. But we made it work fine. It's fine.
It was something like expose and detain that villain. It was something like that.
I think it was. For mass incarceration.
So it improved, but not by a large measure.
Yeah,
I got to tell you, I like it.
Ridiculousness. Yeah.
Actually, I think it's fun. I have no problem with the lyric. I dig it.
Well, we'll save that one for the next one. Maybe they'll have them taking on even bigger villains in the future. You know, I'd love to see.
Oh, you know what? Hey, hang on a second. I think I have a version here. I'm gonna play it for you. Hang on a second. Let me
Catch and expose.
I think that's what it was. Here we go.
To catch and expose that villain.
To catch and expose that
hear
villain.
me smiling, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So that was. I think that's what you did the first session when you came over,
Right.
and then we ended up flying in the new lyric, which was
And unmask that villain.
right. So expose became unmask.
Oh, it sounds so ridiculous.
Right.
And
So I'm thinking
I've
that word expose probably was throwing up some red flags.
yeah, legal was like, he's not going to expose himself. Change it. I mean,
That's a
they're
different
so worried
movie.
about that, but meanwhile, they were absolutely fine having, like, you know, 3 decades of, like, terrible gender stereotypes, etc. inside the thing. You know, that was no problem. But when it came time for a dog to be naked with a suggestion of that.
At one point, we were talking about doing a to catch and expose and unmask and like we're gonna do
Yeah, right.
a bunch of verbs and unmask and reveal that like
Yeah.
add
Yeah,
extra measures.
Yeah, we wanted to just like dig into the thesaurus and put a half bar on a loop. Yeah.
Yeah.
My understanding, though, speaking of that, of the female characters, my understanding is that they have updated and empowered the female characters in the reboot. Is that your impression?
It is. It's actually, if you look at that original 69 cartoon, and I talk about this a lot on the podcast, they're just 4 teenage friends and a dog. There's no romantic entanglements. That's something that came later. Mm-hmm. That's something that was either read into by fans or something that writers kind of picked up on and incorporated later. There were no gender roles. Everybody kind of had an equal representation in the group.
Such it was. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think because they're teenagers, right? Like there is nobody is relegated to like the homemaker or the weaker sex or whatever. It's just there's 4 kids with 4 sets of skills and personalities, and they just kind of do their thing.
I don't know if I agree with that, though, because, I mean, in the 2 female characters, you definitely had one that wore very aggressively form-fitting clothing, and the other one who didn't. And that one was, you know, the smart one. She wore glasses. She was the voice of reason. The other one served as, you know, mostly arm candy for Fred. I mean, I think there was a pretty, I'm not saying, well, it was just a very traditional, you know, gender stereotypes in that original thing. You know, which it's not like it's that unlike anything else from that era, but it definitely was there. And my impression was that they were going to give Daphne a skill so that she had something and give her a brain, you know, and give Velma something that she was into besides just being the smart one who was not wearing the purple miniskirt or what have you. That was my impression. To me, the archetypes, I mean, thinking back on it today, I was just like, oh, well, this is, the Scooby, it's counterculture for sure. They're in like a Volkswagen band. The impression that you get as an older viewer is that, Scooby and Shaggy are stoners, which is why they always want the munchies. I know we've heard that one before. But even inside of the group, there's sort of a split, with like two of them. It's like the split in, the Democratic Party. It's like establishment versus progressive. Fred and Daphne are like, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. And Velma is like, AOC or whatever. And all the fake ghosts are, of course, Republicans. And I could have gotten away with it if it wasn't for those meddling kids.
I've never quite heard it broken down in that way, but that's quite interesting, David.
Listen and learn, my friends.
That's funny.
I'm halfway kidding. But there are those things, there are those tropes, and even, especially when you boil them down to the essence of a children's piece. And when you look at like what kind of myths and legends we're giving kids at super formative age before they're aware of it, Scooby-Doo does one thing, Schoolhouse Rock does yet another and vastly more important thing. They're relying on some of the same devices, educational devices, which is, repetition, whether it's the music cues or the procedural aspect or the fact that the interstitials happen at the same point or that it's every Saturday morning. Like all of these are like things, kids love repetition, and it's also how a fair amount of kids learn.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting to break that down. And it's interesting as well to look at the difference between that era and what morality plays were being shown to children then and, what happened later on. In the same way, you'll appreciate this, like when you think about science fiction and speculative fiction, the best of it had a morality play sensibility. There was always a huge metaphor that was playing out. It's the people are in space, but the imagination of the future is, Star Trek headed in a certain way where there was a diverse cohort on the spaceship, for instance. And when you have that in sci-fi or in a Saturday morning cartoon, when you have that taken away and you get something where the Star Trek of the past, which was trying to tell tales about society, becomes just an action figure with no real heft to it, that's when you get these new things that are like blockbuster hits that are, there's a lot of eye candy, there's great performances, great cinematography, great scoring, but a lot of times it's just story. There's no moral to the story, Yeah. Like Lord of the Rings, for whatever you think of it, they were trying to put a specific period at the end of the sentence and say something that could be applied to life. Game of Thrones is just story.
Fair enough.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Not to be contrarian,
No,
but I would argue...
I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't seen any of this. No, I'm just kidding.
Because when I started this podcast, I kind of started exploring a lot of the iterations of the show. And the one that was running at the time was Be Cool Scooby-Doo, and it was really interesting how they were giving them some very specific kind of roles and personalities, and it had less to do with building on any of those previous, like romantic complications or whatever. It was just, again, going back to Four Friends and a Dog. Guess Who kind of follows through with that as well. Revisiting that 69 series, I'd also revisited some Jetsons not too long ago, and I remember, despite my nostalgia, I was cringing watching the first episode with Jane and her housework. It is very, very rooted in some gender roles, that nuclear family. And revisiting that old 69 Scooby-Doo, I was noticing that a lot of those things that we do attribute to it aren't actually there. I will agree with you that, Daphne is sort of the more attractive of the two women as far as presentation and her wardrobe.
I think Daphne was my first crush.
And Velma obviously wearing like the big sweater.
She's wearing Toby Gillis'
Coke
sweater.
bottle thick.
She is, yeah, totally. I mean, it's
Ernest
totally,
Hemingway.
those characters are modeled, yeah. But I always kind of looked at it as, despite there not being a lot of like racial diversity, and I mean, it's not a surprise for 69, you kind of had representatives from a few different walks of life, with Shaggy and Scooby, and, you know, Velma being kind of the brainy one. Nobody kind of lorded those roles over anybody else. Nobody talked down to anybody else. It was always very egalitarian in how they distributed responsibility and like the respect for others' opinions. Nobody was just like, well, that's stupid, we're not going to do that. And like the danger-prone Daphne thing is something that's been extrapolated on. Yeah, it's weird going back and looking at it and realizing sort of how, for lack of a better word, like naked it all is, and how much we've put on it as a culture in the last 50 years. And that's been evidenced in various iterations of the series, in the films. Like I said, it's stuff that we talk about on the podcast with some of the other podcasters and some of the guests. It's only until kind of now that we're coming back to sort of that purity of that concept. And the new Scoop film has now incorporated some racial diversity because they made Velma a Latina, which was done very kind of subtly. They didn't like draw too much attention to it, and it doesn't kind of shake anything about kind of that foundation of those characters.
I think they must have gotten David Poe's note about her being AOC.
I want AOC to be a guest because that's the whole device, right? Is that
With the Guess Who, yeah.
So there's a new, and didn't they have Ricky Gervais on there at some point?
They did, yeah.
I mean, does Ricky Gervais explain like why he's an atheist to Scooby?
Mostly he just kind of talks about his cat.
Okay. I know he loves animals. I mean, at least
I'm holding out for Noam Chomsky as a guest.
What'd you say?
I said I'm holding out for Noam Chomsky as a guest. I think that would rock.
Oh, are you kidding me?
That'd be amazing.
That'd be the special 2-part episode.
Get Noam Chomsky and Columbo on there.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why it's interesting to talk about these things, and maybe why we're talking about them today. You know, it becomes like when you have something that is, first of all, ubiquitous, second of all, something that is so formative, because it was at a time unlike now where every kid was watching that channel or a lot of kids watching those channels on Saturday morning. And so it becomes this thing where it's like, okay, this is, where we all locate each other and, something that we all have in common, like a Super Bowl or an election. And those ubiquitous events are becoming less and less as time goes on. And this is why the quality of what is there becomes so important. So when the seedling is planted to create something where, from what you're telling me, Mike, it's being made in a cookie cutter way, as cheap and as quickly as possible, with an inherent disdain for its audience, and this becomes our meeting place later on in culture, then it's no wonder that, number one, you have, everyone superimposing their own meanings on all of these stereotypes. And number two, we have 3 grown men talking about a cartoon dog.
Actually, another thing I would like to point out, to the brilliance of what Ruby and Spears kind of came up with back in the day when they were developing these characters, is they're so... You can kind of read almost anything into them, and it doesn't really destroy the characters in any way. It doesn't betray sort of who they are or the dynamic or concept. Over the years, I've heard so many people, either just online or in my own conversations, people who identify with their sort of social status, Fred being a little more together, a little more... some people have attributed him to being a jock, although he was never really portrayed that way in the early series. You've got the pretty one, the brainy one, the scruffy one, LGBTQ people who identify with them for intimated... people have theorized that, Velma's asexual, or Velma's a lesbian, or Velma and Daphne are together, or Fred and Daphne are together. There's so many permutations to these characters and ways that people can insert themselves into the gang that I think is part of the ubiquity of it. It's part of what sort of made them universal it's always when you see yourself in something, maybe that was what was wrong with the series that didn't survive. Maybe they were too specific or derivative or just lacked that, special spark or whatever. But even to this day, like, I just did a podcast with some LGBTQ friends talking about the new film and just kind of seeing their perspective on it and their nostalgia and their love in the way that they've always read the characters. It's kind of a beautiful thing. Something that was created back in like 69, and today people are still kind of reading them as relevant kind of avatars for their own life experience.
Very cool.
Fair enough. You can't argue with its success or of just that being such a fertile time that 60s into early 70s for pop culture and youth culture. It's just an exciting time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to drag it back to the song for a second.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not to say I'm not enjoying the digressions, but Vivek,
Yes.
you mentioned there were a number, like you kept adding kind of lyrics on, and it made me think about the brevity of the song. It's a really tight, really short song, and I'm super curious if there's like a longer version of it, or if it was always intended to be just that really
Short version, yeah.
Yeah.
So, much to our lament, we had to do the short version. In fact, David, I remember you and I talking about this, that it's too bad they didn't allow us to go to the B section. The original song from 69, and I think also the 1970 version, and probably subsequent versions as well, had a whole, like a B section, and then it goes back to the A section. I think this was a situation where it had to be, there was a time limit, and it had to be as long as it was. I think theme songs in general, the trend has been shorter, and in a lot of television shows don't even have them. And so, they're typically something like 15 seconds now, and I forget how long this is. I can check. But there is not a longer version, but maybe we should make one.
Totally. The bridge it goes to the 4 chord, right? You got a mystery to solve the thing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, attention spans and also more time to sell commercials, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I know sometimes a longer song is created, but then it's edited down to fit whatever the length of the title sequence is. I've known like a number of shows that have done that, and even pop songs that get edited down to become theme songs. So there was a part of me that hoped that there was a longer version.
Well, I think we should make one. I think we should
go
back to the session. I've got the session file open. Let's do the B section and let's make it a longer. Yeah, that's the direction that I got was to score this particular clip, which was 18 seconds long or however long it was, and so it's really pretty tightly glued to that, and there is no longer version.
Yeah.
But like I said, there's no good reason why we couldn't do it, other than it will take some time and energy, and we're all busy on other things. But yeah.
Tell me where to send the check.
Yeah, it really is kind of too bad. It's like you get one bite of the cookie and then you want more, but that's all there.
Right. Are the original composers still with us, Mike?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I remember seeing an interview with the vocalist, but it was from like 2013 or something.
I see, right.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Not sure if he's still with us. I'd have to double check. It's been a while since I've looked.
I wonder about those guys and if they're like the Boyce and Hart team that wrote a fair amount of those songs for the Monkees, as well as some other notables. Neil Diamond wrote on Carole King. I just wonder about. I mean, that's why I was asking about the history and the factory of where they made it and how. Like, I picture a bunch of like Hollywood people in the late 60s or 70s being like, I don't know, I just got a call for a cartoon, man. Well, come on over.
Well, that was basically the extent of the interview. I mean, he had done a lot of different stuff, but he was like, yeah, I got a call, and I was like, okay, I'll come in. And, it's kind of like the session mentality, right? You come in, you sing a song, you get paid, you go home.
Yeah.
And then somebody phones you 40 years later and says, hey, you did that thing, can we talk? And they're like, what?
Yeah, right. Yeah, great.
And you just don't think it's going to... I mean, back then, they didn't even think we were going to still be able to watch these things because there was no, like, widely available recordable media. So it was TV and that was it.
Yeah, so...
Which is also part of the reason why they were okay sort of doing it cheap because they didn't think it was going to live on for posterity.
You make a really good point there in that, like, they were printing magazines, not writing novels, and there was certainly no way that they would have thought at the outset, especially given their track record, that they were going to make some illustrious thing that lasted for 50 years. That was not the intent.
That magazine metaphor is really good, actually.
Yeah, thank you. But,
I'm also curious, Vivek, you mentioned any opportunity you have to work with David, you take.
Yes.
But what was it about David that really sparked in your imagination for this song? What did you think he was going to bring to it?
I was really more thinking about it from a musical perspective than an attitude or social kind of perspective. David has very, very good control vocally. Like, his intonation is spot on. His sense of time is really, like, he's got his sense of pocket is really, if you ever hear him play live, he's just a very good sense of rhythm and pitch, and a wide vocal range, but also a wide range of expression. So I just thought, well, at that point I was still trying to figure out what it was going to be, and I figured that we could audition a lot of different ideas perhaps in the room and see what's working, what's not. And what's interesting is the very first take was sort of him doing what he was hearing in his head as being appropriate. And it was just, apart from the musicality of it, apart from the technical aspects of pitch and time, in terms of the attitude, it was just spot on. And I think it was really more just that I really trusted him as a musician and as somebody who was flexible artistically to be able to do whatever was needed. So if it needed to be a little more of a soul singer type of thing, he could go in that direction. If we realized, okay, this is going to be more rock and roll, put on your, Robert Plant hat and do that he would be able to do it. So, it's been a couple of years now, so I don't remember exactly what I was thinking, but I'm pretty sure that it was something in that range.
And David, did you perform anything instrumentally on it, or was it just vocals?
No, I really just walked in there and sang to a perfect track. Like I said, we got done with it and we were just smiling. Vivek and I always have a lot of fun, but we were just smiling. We were like, "Yep, that sounds right." I had forgotten about the lyric change, but aside from that, I guess that's what it was. But this is what you get when you work with people who not only are great at their craft, but also just people you love. It's so fun to work with your friends because you share a shorthand, often similar aesthetic or background, where there's not a whole bunch of debate. There's no accounting for taste. You just kind of when it's there, and if it's not there, you're both happy to keep going after it.
Yeah.
And Vivek and I have hung out a lot. We've played a bunch of gigs together. We were talking about this the other day. We've done, we've been to multiple Sundance film festivals and then the Sundance events, and we've performed together. We were talking about this crazy gig that we did for it was Redford and Sam Shepard and
Stanley Tucci, and
Tucci was there. Yeah,
and Joe Gordon-Levitt was there.
Yeah, just wound up in this audience. We played a benefit that James Cromwell was at, and Gore Vidal. Yeah, right. Yeah, it was it was shortly before Gore passed on. But yeah. I remember that, and I remember it specifically because it was your shirt, right, Vivek? I'm telling you.
Yeah. So it was. So David and I, we sort of put together this sort of ad hoc trio for this gig, and at one point I was talking to Gore Vidal, and at this point this was very late in his life, and he was in a wheelchair, and I guess his hearing wasn't very good, so I kind of had to get really close to him to talk to him, and somehow the tail of my shirt got caught in the spokes of his wheelchair, and as his assistant then wheeled him off, it like tore my shirt, and so we decided to name the group Tor Vidal.
A group which, by the way, included our mutual dear friend Dan Licht, who also is no longer with us. But Dan was the guy that did many notable things, but a specific note was he was the guy that did the score for Dexter.
Nice.
And he was actually another Sundance-esque colleague.
Oh yeah, that's how I met
um,
Dan. Was through Sundance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And I collaborated with him on a song that went on the Dexter thing too. So I guess it's a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a small world.
Tor Vidal. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've had a lot of fun, and Vec plays sometimes with this group, more mutual friends, this group called String Theory, which is a multimedia dance, music, film, and sound sculpture project. I've seen him do a lot of those things, and anyway, it's nice to work with people you love.
Yeah.
And trust.
Yeah, that's probably more important than anything.
But they go hand in hand, you know, and I mean, I've watched Vivek was in some ways fully formed insofar as a composer ever is fully formed. But I mean, he had done many things of note, you know, before I met him. And, you know, I soon came to learn that he understands every instrument and he plays many of them very well and has this the creativity and also a kind of analytical appreciation for genre and tone and quality that is exceedingly rare. So I'm one of many who love working with him. And then the work he's done, you know, in the time I've known him, it just keeps getting better and better. Again, I hope you'll play some clips from the other stuff if that's like cool with you, Vivek, just so people can see the range. The score for the PBS show, the Asian Americans. It's called Asian Americans, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it American Revolutionary or something like that?
Yeah, that's another one. That is also amazing. That one's got American Revolutionary is so much like the subject of the film. Grace Lee Boggs, who's a great civil rights feminist pioneer, and the music is, you know, it's plucky and triumphant and desperate at times as she was. And then the Asian Americans, like, we haven't talked about this, Vivek, but that is really a stunner. I found that very satisfying.
Well, thank you.
Atonal stuff, beauty, tenderness. There's your characteristic orchestral majesty. There's touches of Bernard Herrmann in there. I know he was an influence on you. Yeah. So yeah, when it comes time to do the theme show for the cartoon dog thing, it's just like, yeah, let's go. I'll bring a bottle of wine.
You both spoke to it being a very quick process. Roughly how long did it actually take?
half hour.
The vocals were
Super
probably-
quick.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it probably could have taken less time because we were sort of experimenting a bit after we got it. We're like, well, what else can we do? How can we do this differently that might be interesting? And that was also useful because it also did help us really understand the first thing we recorded was correct.
Yeah.
But yeah, the vocals were pretty fast. And one of the things I really like about it is it sounds like David Poe. It sounds like Happy Poe. I don't know. When you think of because David Poe is like, like I used the term brooding earlier, but like there's a kind of introspection and delicateness to his music that it's exquisite and it's precise. And then this sound, the Scooby-Doo theme, when he's singing on it, it sounds like that same guy, but like he's in a different world or something.
After having a really good day.
Happy Poe is what it sounds like.
I think you got a new side project there, David.
I was happy. Yeah.
Yeah.
As far as the instrumentation, you pretty much did it all, right, Vivek?
Yeah, so the first thing I did was the drums. Once I got the drums down, then bass track, which I did on a Fender jazz bass, but I was trying to give it that, like, more of a Motown kind of sound, so I have a way to make my jazz bass kind of, to give it a little more of that P-bass sound. It's a little fatter. But I definitely was going after a kind of James Jamerson sort of vibe. And I tuned the drums pretty high, which is what was done back in the day. Typically back in the day, the toms were tuned. I used coated heads with no damping, so everything rings out. I have a really nice 6.5-inch deep Ludwig Black Beauty, which is it's a snare drum. It's the most recorded snare drum in history. It's sort of like the Fender Stratocaster of snare drums. It's all those great Motown records. John Bonham used it. It's pretty much the sound of pop music in my view. And I tuned it up pretty high, so it's not quite like timbale pitch, but it's a very high pitched snare, and you can hear it ring out. And then once I did the drums and the bass, I added guitars. And originally I did this very kind of sort of almost Nile Rodgers-y clean thing with the sort of quacks on 2 and 4, and then I wanted it to be a little more rock and roll, so that's when I pulled out the Les Paul and the Marshall Plexi, and then there's Hammond organ in it to kind of thicken it up a bit and give it a little more vintage sauce. And then the last thing I did was the horn section.
So is the horn section the only thing that's synthesized, or did you actually bring horns in?
So it's not synthesized, but I'm using virtual instruments. And I have a particular technique. This is actually interesting. My original idea was to demo it with virtual brass instruments, and then, pending Chris Bailey's approval, bring in the live section. And he was like, "That's great. That's perfect. Don't change it." And so and frankly, I don't know that he knew that those weren't live players. And at that point, I didn't bother telling him that it wasn't, because I didn't want to open up a whole other can of worms. But I have a way that I can use virtual instruments, I have a way of dialing them in so that even like actual brass players can listen to it and think they're hearing a live brass section. That is probably what took the most amount of time, actually. Probably spent a good maybe 6 hours just massaging the brass section to make all the different parts really sing in a way that my goal whenever I'm doing this sort of thing is that, like, if I'm doing a sax part, if I bring in a sax player, I want them to think that was an actual living, breathing person who played that part. That's the goal. And so
I think you succeeded.
I think it sounds legit. Yeah. And I have a way that I do it that I can, if I want it to sound more 1940s, I can do that. If I want it to sound like, in this case, I was going for like an early 70s, like I said, sort of Tower of Power kind of sound. And so that was the specification that I built for myself.
So would 40s just be like a more big band kind of sound?
Yeah, so it depends. With a 40s sound, typically it'll be 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, that is to say sometimes 3 tenor trombones and 1 bass trombone, and then 5 saxes, so 2 altos, 2 tenors, and a bari sax. And sometimes a flute or maybe alternating the winds, meaning the saxes might switch over to flutes. But that's sort of your archetypical 40s sound. But there's a way that the saxophone section in particular was typically voiced in the 40s. And you can hear it in the classic big band orchestration. It's a way of stacking the voices so that they create this really fat chord. And there was also a vibrato style that you heard in the 40s that you didn't hear. It was a different style in the 20s, and it was, again, a very different thing like in the 60s and 70s. And it was a particular kind of way that they would hit a note and then gradually ease into the vibrato, and there was like a speed and an intensity to it that when you stack all the saxes together, it just gives you this really gorgeous sound. So yeah, when I'm trying to create a 40s sound, I really try to pay attention to that. It's called, the music term is called soli, S-O-L-I, and it's basically you're taking 5 solo instruments and making, I guess soli is the plural of solo.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's like a big band orchestration technique, and it's really difficult to do using virtual instruments, but it's doable, and it's a sound that I really like. It's something I used in this case. In this case, it was 3 saxes, but yeah.
This is one of the reasons I was looking forward to talking to you, because in the research that I did, like seeing other interviews that you've done, when you're talking about the music, like you really get out there into the sticks. You really talk about like the specifics, and you get a real sense for like the intentionality behind the compositions and kind of how much thought goes behind it. Like it's not just somebody going, oh well, it's based on the original theme, so we'll just do this and whatever, and it's done, and there you go. Like there's a lot of real thought, and there's a lot of soul that's in it too.
Thank you. And Chris Bailey was it's something that was important to him as well. Like he wanted it to sound really legit. And he was very insistent from our first conversations that this has to sound like a live band of musicians playing together in the room, and it's got to feel groovy, and it's got to, he wasn't really aware of how the sausage was made. And frankly, I didn't really tell him how I was doing it because I didn't want to prejudice him if he thought that it was one guy doing it all. So I was intentionally kind of vague with him until he signed off on it and said he liked it. And at that point, I don't think actually we ever really got into the details of how it all came together. But so he might even still believe that I hired like a big group and we all sat in the room and set up some mics and played in real time. I don't know.
In a way, you did. You contain multitudes, Vivek. You've got a whole band inside of you.
So I've got a couple of concluding questions, and you may have kind of already answered them in the body of the conversation, but if you had to choose a version of the show, like Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, if you had to sit down and watch some Scooby-Doo, which one would you choose? What series would be kind of your go-to?
I can tell you, I think I would watch the new one, the Scooby-Doo and Guess Who. Actually, I'm not sure if this is fair. I would say this one and the original one. There's enough that's similar that I like, but they're also quite divergent. And like I think in the new series, the dialogue's a little snappier and they're being clever in a different kind of way. But there's also kind of a simplicity and earnestness to the original show that really resonates for me.
And Fred has a catchphrase finally. How about you, David?
I would read a book. I don't mean to be glib. I'm really looking forward to seeing the new series. I've only seen the open, and aside from that, I've only seen the original series, and that was years and years ago. So I haven't sampled the other ones, although I know there's been a lot of permutations.
After getting to know you a little bit over the course of the conversation, I think I would have been disappointed if your answer was anything else.
Sorry, I have this reputation for being a bit of a prick.
It's all good. It's all good.
I am, I do think about these things because it's like, in the same, we did this project. We're constantly making these incursions into pop culture, and we never know how they are going to resonate. But in the same way that, like, even the music, that has come out in the last year or 5 years, a fair amount of just the pop music I'm talking about, in the course of the past months, when, we've experienced virus and massive protests, that went from our country all around the world. Some of that music, especially the stuff that's just banal, the celebrations of stupidity, that stuff rings really hollow right now to me, even more hollow than it did before. So I just think about these things where it's like, when you have an opportunity to work with great people or with a director who gives good notes, or you get an opportunity to do something that actually is going to appear in the mainstream and at least be amplified by systems, even if there's no way if we can tell if it's going to be a franchise that, hangs around for 50 years. All of these are reasons for the artists and the players and the editors and the writers and everyone to, like, if you get that opportunity, do the shit out of that opportunity, and like make it good, and don't be disdainful of your audience. Bring quality into the mainstream and into pop culture in whatever way you can. I don't mean to sound sanctimonious, but like try to be really, really good.
Yeah.
Even if we are working in disposable culture, and that's what I think about.
You talk about it feeling kind of hollow with all that's going on. I kind of shut the podcast down for like a month because when the George Floyd thing happened, I just didn't feel, it just felt wrong to be posting on social media like anything happy. It's like the world is burning. Like this is, we're at a point in history, we're at a flashpoint, and as significant as some people might maybe think this is historically for animation or whatever, it's like there's just bigger things going on, and I just put all my energy into signal boosting what I can, donating, protesting. Like that was just a much better way to spend my time during that period, and just kind of recently I've been getting back into the swing of this.
But, what a cool thing. That's beautiful. I think that's really beautiful, and so many people feel that way, and it's like that's a fair amount of what art is for. It's not, I mean, really, maybe it's even the difference between art and entertainment. And maybe that's where I should have started this conversation before I started to shoot my mouth off, which I didn't intend to. You should cut out all the stuff that you find too strident. But
I actually, for a while, I was trying to keep the politics away from the social media and the podcast, because I'm like, should a Scooby-Doo podcast be posting Black Lives Matter posts or sharing videos about police brutality? And after like about a day of not doing anything, I thought, well, no, actually, that's more of a statement to have that incongruity, to say, no, this is big enough that you might not think this belongs here, but I invite the politics now, and I'm not. It's part of the reason why I'm really appreciating this conversation too, because it's not just about kind of the cartoon. Like we are talking a little bit about art and commerce, and that's all part of it.
God, it's a beautiful thing, I think. And I mean, you've got now the Children's Television Workshop, just Sesame Street just did this beautiful thing where Elmo is talking about racism with his dad.
Yeah.
And it's profound, And you've got another animated series, Big Mouth, that Nick Kroll and John Mulaney and many more. They did a Planned Parenthood episode that is like the single greatest pro-reproductive rights animated thing I can imagine. It's fantastic. And you have this thread, it's a bit Beatle-esque, you have this thread of people making stuff like that, and some of it is very simple, and some of it is more complex. But making something that situates itself, and has some merit, and situating it in pop culture. I mean, there's nothing more beautiful to me.
Considering the thread of what we've been talking about for the last few minutes, have any of your peers, either of you, kind of given you the side eye where it's like, really, Scooby-Doo?
They're always happy when we work, right? Before.
I gotta tell you, it's something I'm proud of. Like I mean, I think that people appreciate what's intrinsically good about it, and it's fun. Yeah, I haven't I have not gotten any sort of negative vibes from anyone about this.
And David?
No, certainly not. I mean, first of all, you have the breadth of your entire body of work, so hopefully, you acquit yourself through that. But even even when it's like, I think Scooby-Doo has great merit. I hope I've said so. But even when you see a great actor in a bad movie, sometimes you get these great performances, or a great character actor turn as a character actor in a movie that's only so. You can still do good work.
Well said.
And this was just so much fun.
So what are you guys working on now, project-wise?
I'm producing a record now with a colleague of mine. Actually, two records. One that's actually a soundtrack for another PBS documentary series that just premiered with my colleague Ginger Shankar, who I also met through Sundance. And then I'm also producing another record for her on the Concord Jazz label, which is connected to her family. It's a family project. It's connected to her. Everyone's familiar with Ravi Shankar and, of course, George Harrison and the usual cast of characters around that group of people. And what's interesting is that the culture was really kind of steeped in these sort of patriarchal assumptions. And a lot of the women in the family were also musicians who were quite accomplished, but their accomplishments were overshadowed by the contributions of the men. And so this project really kind of celebrates the contributions of like her mother and her grandmother, Ginger's mother and grandmother. So it's I'm pretty excited about it. It's on the Concord Jazz label. I think Nora is supposed to be on it.
Yay!
And Anushka, and then I think MIA is also going to make an appearance, and I'm pretty excited about it. And also working on, I've got a couple of independent films that I was supposed to be scoring right now, but because of the pandemic, of course, everything has gotten pushed back, and we'll have to see how the schedule comes out. But
I guess if you're using live players, it's kind of not doable.
Yeah, well, the issue is that I've been doing remote sessions actually.
Oh, cool.
But the issue is that they were supposed to have been filming in the spring, and
okay.
Yeah, and in both cases they sent me the script, and I've come up with some musical ideas, and they were going to be sending me dailies, and I was going to start working on both films while they were sort of wrapping up the shoot and then going into post. Now, so neither film was actually shot, or at least has yet been shot. And one of them, I just got the new screenplay. So I was able to read that and maybe come up with some ideas. But those were supposed to occupy the rest of my year. And that's not happening now. But I've got a couple of other things that are possibilities. So we'll see.
Cool.
David.
We'll watch for those.
Thanks.
David?
I've spent the pandemic making a record of pop songs about surveillance capitalism and, the world. First single is called Gun for a Mouth. It comes out September 18 on the ECR Music Group via the Orchard and Sony, 6 weeks before the American election.
Nice. I really love how people have embraced the structure and the idea of like pop music to communicate kind of deeper meanings, deeper messages. I remember there's a Canadian band named Stars. They were saying like there's no reason you can't use a great pop lick, a really great addictive melody to talk about like deeper things. And they were just kind of, the idea of pop music was bubblegum, right? It's like disposable. It's summer listening or whatever. And it really seemed, in the last 15, 20 years to be like gaining a lot of ground. So
cool. Although there's a vast tradition there, you could take it back to, if you just go 100 years to Robert Johnson, certainly to Yip Harburg, who wrote stuff like, Can You Spare a Dime?
But even like Neil Young and Ohio, right? And there's...
Yep.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the in between Bob Dylan, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, the Beatles, that opened up the lyrical end of it. And now, Kendrick Lamar won a Pulitzer Prize. It's a long-standing tradition. It's not for everyone, but it changes with the times, and that's the exciting thing about now, is that as difficult as this has been, perhaps we are in a more fertile time for change than any of us have experienced in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
The music will reflect that, and all the media will reflect that, you know.
I look forward to hearing that. As I said, I was listening to your stuff just before, leading up to the conversation, and it put me in this like really calm, meditative headspace when I was scribbling down some notes, and it was good. It was the most productive I felt all day. So
thank you.
I give you some of the credit for that.
Thank you, brother, man. Well, this next one rocks a little harder than the last, but we'll send it along when it's done.
Perfect.
Thanks so much for having us on. This has been a lot of fun.
This has been great. I did not expect it to go this long or be this wandering and fun.
Awesome.
So thanks again, guys. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show. Good luck in your future endeavors, and we will definitely be watching out for those new projects when they come out.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Take care.
And there you have it. That concludes my conversation with David Poe and Vivek Maddala, the two composers, singers, songwriters, multi-instrumentalists who are responsible for the theme song for the latest iteration of Scooby-Doo on digital and television, Scooby-Doo and Guess Who. I hope you enjoyed the interview now that it's all complete. I thought it was a really great conversation. I thought we covered a lot of interesting stuff, and it was a real deep dive into the musical side of creating what is a 19-second piece of music. I honestly was really, really hoping that there would be like a minute-and-a-half version, you know, like the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You theme, where there would be more music and it was just edited down to fit kind of that 19-second pocket that they needed to open the show. But unfortunately, 19 seconds is all we have. I was quite intrigued by Vivek's enthusiasm with the, hey, let's record one. Let's do the B section right now. Let's get this done. And who knows? Perhaps I will see what I can do in that department. Let's see how much influence I have with these gentlemen. They're normally quite busy, but with the pandemic, perhaps the magic can happen. If you want to catch up on more of what Vivek and David are up to, you can check out their websites. Vivek's website is maddala.com, maddala.com. It's got the bio, the music, the news, the information, all the sort of stuff you need to, all the resources you need to catch up on what he is up to. And David Poe is at davidpoe.com. And September 18th, David said he just released a new song. It's called Gun for a Mouth. I have been listening to it. I have been enjoying it very much. It is on regular rotation on my playlist right now. I'd recommend checking it out, and I'm looking forward to hearing the full album when it finally drops. If you want to get in touch with me and the podcast, you can find me on most of the social media. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, at Scooby-Doocast, or a podcast named Scooby-Doo. Just put it into a search engine, and it's likely to come up me. There's also the blog, which is scoobydoocast.wordpress.com. If you're looking for some text interviews, I do what I call the Apocalypse Variations, which is basically just talking to artists who have contributed variant covers to the Scooby Apocalypse series that ran under the DC Hanna-Barbera line for 36 issues. And whenever I can nab one of those very talented people to talk a little bit about their process, I do. The last one, I believe, was Will Conrad, if I'm not mistaken. Previous installments featured John Boy Myers and Joelle Jones. Looking forward to getting more of those out there. If you stream or download the show off of Apple Podcasts, I'd appreciate it if you rated and reviewed the show while you were there. And if you could follow, like, share, or subscribe to all the social media, that's also really helpful. And coming up on the podcast is a little treat. Courtesy of Mr. Maddala, I have obtained permission to basically give you guys a bit of a process breakdown of the theme song, brief as it may be. Going to put together a bit of a mini episode spotlighting 5 different versions of the theme song from kind of conception to completion, and I think that's going to be pretty cool to go through. And following that, we're going to have a returning guest to the show who's bringing some friends. And we're going to do some Halloween-themed content, considering the time of year that it is. And there will probably also be at least 2 commentaries coming out before the end of October. So, as I said a few weeks ago, a lot of fun, a lot of good stuff coming out in October. Hope you guys stick around for the ride. Going to be some fun and shenanigans in classic APNSD style. Also, one last thing before I go, trying a bit of a new audio setup right now. Not sure I'm loving it. If you guys have some opinions, if you want to let me know what you think of it, I actually would appreciate that. It's been a struggle with the move, just getting back to kind of the audio quality that I'm comfortable with. And until then, there's just going to be some experimentation. So hopefully the quality doesn't bounce around too much. And I appreciate everybody's patience through this transition period. And with that, I bid you all a fond adieu. Thank you so much for joining me on the show this week. Be sure to keep your eyes on the social media for any news, info, and notifications when new episodes drop. I wanted to give you all one last opportunity to hear some music from Vivek. So rather than my usual outro, the brilliant This Is How We Solve a Mystery, we're going to go out on a track called Haunted from the Wild Oranges motion picture soundtrack that came out in 2006. I want to thank you all for joining me on this musical journey. I hope you're all staying safe, staying healthy, and we'll see you next time on a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Sure has been fun for me. It's been fun for you guys too, right?
You know it.
Yeah, fun.
Highlight of my life.